The events and decisions of the next 10 months may well decide the fate of man for the next 10,000 years. There will be no avoiding these events. There will be no appeal from these decisions, and we in this hall shall be remembered either as part of the generation that turned this planet into a flaming funeral pyre, or the generation that met its vow to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war.
The news shakes the United Nations to its very foundations. Dag Hammarskjöld is dead, and the flags of the member countries are lowered in his memory. The troubled UN, which has survived so many crises, must survive still another. In 1953, Dag Hammarskjöld had himself become Secretary General in a time of crisis. During the Korean War, Russian pressure had forced the UN's first Secretary General, Trygve Lie, to resign. Little known before his election by the Security Council, Dag Hammarskjöld was to leave a deep imprint on world history. He traveled tens of thousands of miles in his endless pursuit of peace. He saw the United Nations grow in stature through decisive action in crises such as the Israeli-Egyptian War in 1956. He met many of the world's leaders, and he won the trust of most. And then, as had happened to his predecessor, Dag Hammarskjöld came into conflict with Russian interests and ambitions. And in 1960, Nikita Khrushchev denounced him as a tool of the imperialists and demanded his resignation. Dag Hammarskjöld's reply was direct and simple and straight to the point.
The representative of the Soviet Union spoke of courage. It is very easy to resign. It is not so easy to stay on. It is very easy to bow to the wish of a big power. It is another matter to resist. By resigning, I would therefore, at the present difficult and dangerous juncture, throw the organization to the winds. I have no right to do so. I shall remain in my post during the term of my office as a servant of the organization in the interest of all those other nations, as long as they wish me to do so.
This was Dag Hammarskjöld's finest hour. And so he labored and traveled on in the pursuit of peace, seeking in the strife-torn Congo to end the fighting and the bloodshed. And it is here, shortly after these last films of him were made, that the 56-year-old Hammarskjöld meets death in an airplane crash. Though he does not live to see it, peace, uneasy as it may be, comes to the Congo. It is a fitting tribute to Dag Hammarskjöld. Sweden takes home the native son that went forth in the service of all his fellow men. The king leads the mourners in the church where Dag Hammarskjöld worshipped as a boy. And then the last sad journey begins. Officials from a score of nations look on, Dag Hammarskjöld takes a final salute from the organization he served so well. So it is that the 16th session of the General Assembly meets in sadness and solemnity. The United Nations life, its effectiveness, are at stake as retiring President Boland of Ireland calls the session to order.
16th session of the General Assembly meets today in the shadow of an immense tragedy. In the midst midst of deep and heartfelt mourning, which extends far beyond the walls of this chamber, to millions of men and women throughout the world. For the moment, I would simply propose that as a tribute to the memory of the late Secretary General and of the devoted officers of the United Nations who died with him, and as a mark of our profound condolence with their families and relatives, we should stand and observe a minute of silence, after which this meeting should be adjourned until 10:30 tomorrow morning.
On the following day, the General Assembly convenes to elect a president for the 1961 session.
I now invite the members of the Assembly to proceed to the election of their president for the 16th regular session of the General Assembly.
Ghana, Greece, Guatemala, Guinea, Haiti, Honduras, Hungary, Iceland, Netherlands.
Each of the 99 member nations is entitled to cast one vote for president.
Niger.
The result of the ballot is as follows. Number of ballot papers, 97. Number of invalid ballots, none. Number of valid ballots, 97. Abstentions, 1. Number of members voting, 96. Required majority, 64. Ambassador Manji Slim, 96 votes. His Excellency Ambassador Manji Slim has therefore been elected unanimously to be the President of the 16th session of the General Assembly.
Ambassador Slim, a leading figure in the United Nations since Tunisia became a member in 1956, is the first representative from Africa to serve as Assembly President. Under the provisions of the UN Charter, he will serve for 1 year. Now the General Assembly is ready to take up its two most urgent problems, a successor to Dag Hammarskjöld and a solution to mankind's atomic dilemma. President John F. Kennedy, making his first appearance before the world body, states clearly and firmly America's position on Russia's resumption of nuclear testing and the Soviet Union's demand for a three-man troika to replace the office of Secretary General.
Mr. President, honored delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we meet here in an hour of grief and challenge. Dag Hammarskjöld is dead, but the United Nations lives. His tragedy is deep in our hearts, but the tasks for which he died are at the top of our agenda. A noble servant of peace is gone, but the quest for peace lies before us. The problem is not the death of one man. The problem is the life of this organization. It will either grow to meet the challenges of our age, or it will be gone with the wind, without influence, without force, without respect. Were we to let it die, to enfeeble its vigor, to cripple its powers, we would condemn our future. However difficult it may be to fill Mr. Hammarskjöld's place, It can better be filled by one man rather than by three. Even the three horses of the Troika did not have three drivers, all going in different directions. They had only one, and so must the United Nations executive. So let us here resolve that Dag Hammarskjöld did not live or die in vain. Let us call a truce to terror. Let us invoke the blessings of peace. And as we build an international capacity to keep peace, let us join in dismantling the national capacity to wage war. For 15 years, this organization has sought the reduction and destruction of arms. Now that goal is no longer a dream. It is a practical matter of life or death.
July 1945, the first atomic explosion at the White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico. The unleashing of a force so powerful it could, in a twinkling, turn sand into glass. In the Pacific, less than a year later, 100 overage warships awaited their doom from the sky. Operation Crossroads was the code name. The target, the Bikini Atoll. An Air Force bomber dropped the deadly cargo, then wheeled away to flee fast and far. The mushroom cloud that belched forth from the sea spread upward and outward, swallowing up the ships of the Phantom Fleet and thrusting civilization toward its own crossroads in the atomic age, the beginning of a terrible end, or the dawn of a bright new era. The search for survival in this awesome age turned next to a remote desert wasteland in Nevada and a skeleton community named fittingly Survival City. Here, civil defense officials erected buildings of all types to learn how each would withstand an atomic blast. The doomed city was populated with lifelike models and stocked with real food. The atomic device was mounted on a tower overlooking the ghost town. And troops moved to within a mile of the tower, closer than anyone had ever been to the site of a nuclear explosion. Hunched low, they waited out the countdown. Even as the fireball flare flung itself into the heavens, scientists were at work on a new nuclear breakthrough. Again, they returned to the Pacific Proving Grounds, to the Bikini Atoll, and an obscure island called Alujaland, a strip of sand and coral that had been chosen with deliberate care. Giant plywood canals were set up and a tar paper shack built. In the so-called cab, atomic energy officials placed Mike, history's first hydrogen bomb. Navy ships once more rode the Pacific waters, this time to support the scientists in mooring observation boats to record data on radioactivity and shock waves. Buoys and floats populated with plant and animal life were stationed at fixed positions spanning out from Alujolab to measure the blast's effects. Remote-controlled cameras were set up to film the spectacular show.
Seconds to zero time. Put on goggles or turn away.
Had made a gigantic leap forward, but only history would know whether it was for good or for evil. As helicopters left the trigger ship to survey the devastation, observers prepared to look down on scenes that had never been seen before. The islands adjoining Alujolab were swept clean. As for the test island itself, a terse sentence told its fate. Alujolab is gone. There is nothing there but water. Here is power, incredible power. Power to wipe an island from the face of the earth, and at the same time, power to provide civilization with an abundant and undreamed of better life. This is the atomic dilemma. This is the decision that mankind must make in the days ahead. This is the meaning of President Kennedy's words, dramatically underscored by the films you have just seen, as he tells the United Nations,
unconditional war can no longer lead to unconditional victory. It can no longer serve to settle disputes. It can no longer concern the great powers alone. For a nuclear disaster spread by wind and water and fear could well engulf the great and the small, the rich and the poor, the committed and the uncommitted alike. Mankind must put an end to war, or war will put an end to mankind. Ladies and gentlemen of this assembly, the decision is ours. Never have the nations of the world had so much to lose or so much to gain. Together we shall save our planet, or together we shall perish in its flames. Save it we can, and save it we must. And then shall we earn the eternal thanks of mankind, and as peacemakers, the eternal blessing of God.
For centuries, men have been fascinated by the sun and its mysteries, 93 million miles away. Only during an eclipse, when its overpowering brilliance is hidden by the moon, can scientists with special sun cameras get a look at it, filming the violent explosions on its outer rim. A magnifying glass focusing the sun's rays on a spot on this paper illustrates simply the sun as a source of heat and potential power. An extension of this principle shown here will reveal how scientists today are capturing solar energy. Ordinary mirrors placed at proper angles reflect the warm rays of the sun to a hot focus point. The rays converge to generate enough concentrated heat for the cooking of food. In India, a practical but simple application of this principle substitutes a curved metal reflector for ordinary mirrors. The hope in power-poor countries such as India is to someday harness the heat of the sun for cooking and other home uses through devices that are both practical and inexpensive. Japan, another country where fuel is scarce, is also carrying on extensive solar research. Cookers like this one employ mirrors and are equipped with thermometers. From such modest and varied beginnings, peoples in all parts of the world have in recent years opened vast new vistas for capturing, holding, and putting to work the sun. One of the most ambitious of these efforts to draw power from the sun has been going on for years high in the Pyrenees Mountains of France. Here, one immense reflector directs the solar rays into a parabolic mirror composed of 3,500 separate pieces of glass. The result is a giant solar furnace, which can serve as a smelter or a producer of electric power, capable of burning heavy boards like matchsticks, or melting iron bars like butter. The continuing research may provide man with the cheapest kind of power he has ever had. Even the United States, through a branch of the Army, has been conducting experiments with solar ovens, and it is reported the Russians are doing the same. In the American experiment, which again employs hundreds of reflectors, temperatures can be created that exceed 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit. By triggering the intricate mechanism inside the control room, the Army scientists can create a fire that, at its peak, burns as hot as that generated by the explosion of a nuclear device. The intense heat can be controlled and extinguished with the flick of a switch, and the power generated can be stored for later use. America's first solar home provides a practical demonstration of harnessing sun power. Trapped by glass rooftop collectors, solar heat warms a film of water which transfers its heat to chemicals which pass on the warmth to a hot water radiator system. The housewife sets the temperature by a thermostat, providing heat as it is needed, summer, winter, spring, or fall, every day of the year. In Paris, a hotel is actually using the same process of stored-up sunlight. Scientists have found that energy falling on a typical city block on an ordinary sunny day provides heat equivalent to 2,000 tons of coal. The search for heat and power, which has carried man across many frontiers, returns now almost to the beginning. The sun, new source of energy for human life and progress.
The troubled UN, which has survived so many crises, must survive still another. In 1953, Dag Hammarskjöld had himself become Secretary General in a time of crisis. During the Korean War, Russian pressure had forced the UN's first Secretary General, Trygve Lie, to resign. Little known before his election by the Security Council, Dag Hammarskjöld was to leave a deep imprint on world history. He traveled tens of thousands of miles in his endless pursuit of peace. He saw the United Nations grow in stature through decisive...
For the generation that met its vow to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war.
The news shakes the United Nations to its very foundations. Dag Hammarskjöld is dead, and the flags of the member countries are lowered in his memory.
The events and decisions of the next 10 months may well decide the fate of man for the next 10,000 years. There will be no avoiding these events. There will be no appeal from these decisions, and we in this hall shall be remembered either as part of the generation that turned this planet into a flaming funeral pyre,
The representative of the Soviet Union spoke of courage. It is very easy to resign. It is not so easy to stay on. It is very easy to bow to the wish of a big power. It is another matter to resist. By resigning, I would therefore, at the present difficult and dangerous juncture, throw the organization to the winds. I have no right to do so. I shall remain in my post during the term of my office as a servant of the organization in the interest
of action in crises such as the Israeli-Egyptian War in 1956. He met many of the world's leaders, and he won the trust of most. And then, as had happened to his predecessor, Dag Hammarskjöld came into conflict with Russian interests and ambitions. And in 1960, Nikita Khrushchev denounced him as a tool of the imperialists and demanded his resignation. Dag Hammarskjöld's reply was direct and simple and straight to the point.